Having completed our first year in the Winter League, in the Avon Valleys Winter League, we were a bit better prepared for the second year. The venues were different. Bath had dropped out of the league, and now we had just 7 teams of 12, so quite a small winter league. Winter leagues were meant to have 10 teams, so we were cutting it a bit fine. There was Angling Times weren't that happy about that, but that's how it was. And in preparation, I'd got my head around Dryad, and we were going to fish an open match on Dryad about a month before the first Winter League. So this was towards the end of August. The first Winter League was towards the end of September. Winter Leagues were meant to start from the 1st of October because that was the time when traditionally the main summer opens were all over, and Angling Times actually wanted some match news. That's the history of that. But anyway, we started in the end of September. So a month before, we went to Dryad, and by now we had Brian Hayes fishing for us, and he got good information on how to fish Dryad, maybe from some local anglers, some of the Southampton anglers, I don't know. Back in those days, and we're talking 1980, we didn't have the sophisticated carbon fibre quiver tip rods that we've got now, and ledgering was the name of the game. Fishing feeders, feeder links, and the rod I had was an Roy Marlow Persuader fiberglass swing tip rod, set up with a swing tip and a feeder. And there were a couple of important things Brian said. One was to keep putting the bait in, and we would use sticky mag, which was for a lot of anglers on the sort of secret list at that time. And what we did, we bought catering jars of Horlicks, these huge great jars. I don't know how much, probably about a £5, but you had a vast amount, and then you divvied it out so that you had plenty of this Horlicks to mix with a little bit of water, or even better, something like Coca-Cola, to mix with the maggots, so you could form into balls and put those balls of maggots out. So the idea was to put a lot of feed in. So we're talking about a gallon of maggots, as well as fishing a feeder link. And that feeder link would be fished with a long tail. And Dryad at that time, it would be dredged years later, so it was very shallow. It was 18 inches to sort of 2'6" deep. The best area was about halfway down the lake. You fished both banks, didn't fish the ends. The dam was to the, I believe, the west end, and a little brook came in at the top end, bringing silt in, so that was very shallow. But around about the middle, the carp roved around. They were looking for feed, and off we went to fish this open match. And I started fishing, and after maybe half an hour, the swing tip, sounds archaic now, swing tip shot up, absolutely straightened, and I made one mistake in that match. I struck, and I wound in a rig with no hook on it. I just broken off. The carp were going fast in the opposite direction, and you could dead strike. Fishing something like a 1.7 pound Bayer hook length, 3 pound mainline, and the old 39853 mustad hooks. And I thought, how do I get around this? And what I did, I was using a Mitchell 300, and I undid the nut on the front of the spool until it was almost like a bait runner. So it was very, very little tension on it, just a little bit. And after that, I had a very good match in this open. I landed 12 carp out of 12, and I didn't strike. I just picked up the rod very gently, and the spool would be spinning, and they would run a certain distance, sort of 8-10 yards or so. Just slow them down with my finger on the spool, and then tighten it up very gently, and then just play them in very, very gently, quietly, not trying to wake them up. And at the end of the match, there was that usual tale. Hooked 8, landed 4, landed 3, and Brian won the match with £14, and I was second with £13. So that strike cost me an open match win. But I was a lot more confident. I'd made those important got those important changes in my technique, and that was going to really matter. Not everyone fished that open of our Winter League team, maybe 5 of us. And come the match 4 weeks later, we turned up with a lot of maggots. As I say, half the team had maybe fished the year before, but they hadn't really learned. But we stressed that keep putting this bait in, and don't try and play them hard, play them gently, try and land what you can. In the Winter League, I drew the dam end, which is probably the deepest end, but that's not where the fish were. The fish were in that, as I say, in that middle part. And Brian drew there. We drew next to Farnborough, who, from memory, I believe they'd won it the year before. They were red hot favourites. Bath A were now gone. Bath Rams had gone. And there weren't really any teams to challenge them. And some of them obviously fished with feeders. Some fished on the float on a waggler going out a fair way. And the angler next to me, I think he did that. He went out on a waggler. And like I say, I was in a tough section, but I got 9 carp for £9, and that won the section fairly comfortably. Farnborough guy had 4 carp for £4. I don't know where he was in the section, fairly well up, because this was a bad section. Brian won again. He won the match, again with about £14. And we looked, Phil did his captain's card, went through it all, and we'd got 5 section wins, which was just unheard of. And I don't know how many we had in the frame, apart from Brian, but I was about 14th overall in, like I say, one of the worst sections. So, and I was 5th in the team, so it shows how well we'd done. Anyway, they added the points up, and we'd actually won that first Winter League match of the season. And Farnborough couldn't believe it. They said, well, we want to recount the points. Oh, they said to us. And we said, well, look at our captain's card. We've got 5 section wins. We've caught a lot of fish. We've done well here. And I think they'd come 2nd or 3rd or something like that. But they could not believe that we challenged them. The next Winter League was on Hollybush Lane pits, which are somewhere in the greater Farnborough area. I say that because it's always complicated to me. You've got sort of Fleet and Farnborough, Farnham, Aldershot, Ashvale, all these places all sort of join into one over quite an area. And amongst them there are a number of fisheries, all sorts of fisheries, and the Basingstoke Canal. And these were some old pits that Farnborough had for many years. So very much their home water. And it was all about fishing bloodworm on the pole and pole fishing, waggler fishing like wagglers. To make it even tougher, although we were only into early October, we had hard frost. There was almost ice in the margins, and we're only talking about the sort of 10th of October. But we did very well. We couldn't beat Farnborough on their home water. They won, but we were 2nd. I won my section with about £1.50 a little roach. And again, we were next to Farnborough. We were giving them a real run for their money. Mike Phillips, he'd had, I think he framed with about £3.50 and won his section as well. We had some good results. It wasn't bad at all. The next match, again, was pretty much a home venue for Farnborough. We were on the Loddon at Sindlesham Mill, which years later would be noted for barbel. Back then, it was a fairly tough venue. And again, we went up for an open match. This is on the outskirts of Reading. The M4 crosses the Loddon sort of halfway up the match length. And we went up for an open the week before, and the river was rising. We'd had a lot of rain overnight. It's not a very big river. I think there's the white water and the black water joined to become one, and it was coming up fast, and they'd opened the gates at the actual mill. I had a stinking cold, and I was travelled up with Phil. He drove. And I remember chucking out a feeder and getting a few bites that I couldn't hit. And it was just getting worse and worse, and I had nothing to show, and Phil was struggling. And so we came on halfway through the match with nothing to show for it really. Anyway, a week later, we'd obviously had quite a wet week, but the river had settled. It was still up and coloured, but it was dropping now, and it wasn't too bad. And I drew just above the M4 with a bit of a slack on the inside. And once again, we got Farmer on the next peg. We kept drawing next to them. And with this bit of slack, I started John Raisin next to me. And I started fishing probably a stick float or a small pacemaker with a little hook. And in the first hour, I think I had one little tiny dace. John had a sort of standard trot down. It was quite pacey. I don't think he had much to show for it. Maybe one or two little dace in gudgeon. One of my realisations around about 1980 was that the lead or the feeder could be a useful method when things were tough. And so I set up my persuader swing tip rod, but with a very sensitive little quiver tip. They're all screw-ins on there. There used to be one called a Wintle picker, very, very fine, very sensitive, with a tiny little bomb. They were lead in those days, and a 22 hook with just a sort of 2-foot tail and a little link for the bomb. And carried on. I was loose feeding into this slack, and I started to pick up fish, gudgeon, net roach. I had a chub over a pound, and I quite enjoyed myself. At about 3 pounds, and actually won the section again. The team did, I can't remember how. I think we were sort of somewhere in the middle. It was a bit of a struggle for us, and it was clear that Farnborough were gaining the ascendancy for that season, and there probably wasn't a lot we were going to be able to do about it. But we were all right. We were doing okay. The next match was on the Thames near Wallingford, downstream of Wallingford. There was a place called Fairmile. There is a place called Fairmile, where there was access to an old ferry lane. And I think Fairmile was the sort of Berkshire County lunatic asylum in long past days. Lovely stretch of river. And again, we went up for an open the week before, and the river had been up. Nice flow, but it was pretty pacey. It had a tinge. Thames regulars would probably say it was perfect. I struggled to float fish it. It was pretty hard going, and I went out on a maggot feeder out there, got that to hold. Now I know far more about ledgering on the Thames with bread and all the rest of it, but back then that's what I did. I had some roach and dace, quite nice sized fish, a nice skimmer, about 2.5 pounds, but went for a walk to have a look. And there was an angler fishing for Farnborough. I think it was Roger Ackers, and he was a good angler, and he had a lovely swim with a sort of crease, and he fished a stick float. He had about 17 pounds of lovely Thames roach. Size limits had gone by then, although not that it would have affected him too much. Really nice net of fish, won the open. A week later we turned up, and by now the river had dropped a bit. Still had a fair pace, but it was quite a bit clearer, and it was obvious it was going to be a bit tough. And I've got a feeling we travelled up. Someone said, "Oh, I can get you a big van, like a Luton-bodied furniture van." So about 3 or 4 people were in the front on the bench seat. The rest of us actually sat on our boxes in the back of this van. We had a big sack of ground bait in there, our rod holdalls, no windows, no seat belts, and it's from Wareham, it's close on 100 miles each way to Wallingford, or near Wallingford, and that's how we went up. And once or twice Phil went round a bend a bit much, and we all went flying across the back of the van, and we sort of bang on it, not so fast on the bend. No, couldn't see us or anything. We could just shout through the partition wall. Anyway, Phil had, I think he was a bit negative about it, and I was, because I'd fished the Thames for years and years, I knew that the Thames could be tough, but you had to be positive about how you fished it, because someone was going to catch fish. And guess what? We drew next to Farnborough again. Just couldn't get away from them. And the Farnborough guy next to me set up a stick float. We had about 12 foot of water, deep, and I think I managed to get to the bottom of the bank and stand in the water in about 6 inches of water. There's this touch of frost. The water, it wasn't too bad. So the bank was sort of level with my shoulder behind me. I could get down there all right. That's what I remember. And I set up what I thought was a big pacemaker, 3 treble A pacemaker. I was not onto the croaker, but I overshotted it by about 2 or 3 BB or more. So I was really holding it up and get with a lot of bulk down. With 12 foot of reasonably pacey water, it was obvious to me the pegging wasn't particularly generous. If I just loose fed, by the time the maggots got down the river, they were going to be, you know, by the time they hit the bottom, they'd be a long way down the swim, and that wasn't any good. So we didn't have the continental ground baits, but I mixed up some brown crumb, pretty stiff, made little balls sort of a bit bigger than walnuts, and just put half a dozen maggots in each and dropped these in, squeezed them really tight so they went straight down. Then they would break up fairly quickly and release the maggots. And I was fishing a 22 hook, like I say, overshotted and putting it through. I don't remember fishing a feeder in that match. Maybe I should have done, but it was, I don't think anyone caught on the feeder near me. And I picked up some quite nice roach, not a lot of them, 1 or 2 little ones. And the Farnborough guy on his much lighter rig, he had about 5 roach, but they only weighed 12 ounces, whereas I had 10 roach for £3. And the only guy who beat me in the section by 1 roach, basically, there was a corner, and he was on that corner with that slack, and he was holding in that slack. And I think I had sort of £3.5 an ounce, and he had £3.2, not much in it. So I now had 3 section wins and a second in section. But unfortunately for the team, that negativity had spread through most of the team, and instead of fishing with not so much attacking it, but putting the real effort into it, we only had 5 weighers, which was not much good to us. And we were well down. I think we were about 5th out of 7. And the rest of the team, believe it or not, had just 11 ounces. So 4 of them had 11 ounces. So I was a little bit, I don't know, I won't say miffed, but you can't tell everyone how to fish in a team of 12, and you don't know what they came up against that day. But it was a bit of a downer in a way. One angler who wasn't complaining, Roger Ackers, fishing for Farnborough again, had drawn the same peg as the week before, the one he'd won off in the Open, and caught pretty much the same. He'd got £16, I think, this week. A lovely roach. What a cracking swim. That's where the fish were. So he had no complaints. 2 wins in 2 weeks. 2 matches to go. I'm pretty close to leading the points. The angler who'd beat me in that section with the £3, Rick Keiko, was one of the anglers who was pushing me, and there was Dave Sweet, one of the Farnborough anglers. Rick Keiko, I think, was fishing for Ringwood back then. He was doing very well. The 5th match was scheduled for the Froome at Wareham on our Hollybush Lane stretch, which is the non-tidal and also part of the tidal above Wareham. About a mile of water there, and we scheduled it for the start of November, so no one would have fished it, I don't think. The trouble was, on the Friday night it rained very heavily, and the Saturday morning, and the league organiser was Pete Hutchinson of Ringwood, and we phoned him up and we said, this, with it really dirty on the Froome, and it won't clear till Monday. It clears quite quick, a lot quicker than the Stour, but it's going to be horrible, a real washout. You're going to struggle to catch anything. But we can put it on the piddle, which seems weird, but we can get 4 sections on the piddle, 28 pegs. And we had some small still waters near Corfe Castle at Norton Ponds. They're full of little stunted roach and rudd. And we put the rest on Breach Pond, which will be quite hard. Back then there were no bream or rudd or perch, so that would be quite tough, but we think we'll get far more people weighing in, and Pete Hutchinson said it's up to you. So we made the decision. We weren't any better off than anyone else. I think we did reasonably well. I think Farnborough won it. I drew at Loddon, which was a good draw really, and at about £3 odd, but I didn't have the best peg in the section, and one of the Farnborough guys won my section with about £5. And third weight came off that pond with about £8. But amazingly, the piddle had the top weight, so I think there was a £10 and a £9 of nice dace, which was vindicated on there. Some of it was pretty tough. It was dace or nothing on the piddle. I doubt if there were any roach caught. There were roach down there, but it was probably all dace. But it got us out of a tight spot. So it was all down to the final match as far as I was concerned. Our chance of winning the league had gone. We were hanging on in there. We were sort of running neck and neck with Farnborough B in sort of second or third place. Farnborough were in a very strong position now. And the final match would be on the Dorset Stour at Blandford, so Bryanston, Blandford St Mary, possibly Stourpane. 84 pegs, quite a lot to put on there. The river was low and clear, and once again we had a really hard frost. And on that sort of water, if you get a good enough peg, you can have a good day's fishing. If you don't, you're in trouble. And I drew on Bryanston, gin clear, couldn't get a bite on the float, and eventually went on this little little tiny hook. And I caught a minnow. Well, minnows aren't very big, they're tiny. And I needed a third in my section to win the league to guarantee beating still Dave Sweet and Rick Keiko, who were really chasing me. If they won either of them won their section and I didn't come third or better, I was in trouble. And I got third equal in my section. I was given 1/4 ounce. Another guy had a tiny gudgeon and a minnow, but he was also given 1/4 ounce, and these things were so small they're not registering on the scales. But the way the league rules worked was that if you had an equal, you got the full points. So it was 7 points for a section win, 6 for a second, and in this case both third equals got 5 each instead of 4.5. There were no half points, and that was the league rules. Rick Keiko and Dave Sweet had both won their sections, so my third was enough. I clinched it by a point, which shows you need a lot of luck to win the league individually. In later years I came third in the league overall in the Hans Wilson Dorset twice, and both times I had one bad draw that just stopped me winning it. I'd get 5 really good results but not a 6th one, and just bomb out some diabolical section where no one caught anything, and a single fish quite often would have won me the league, but that's the by and by. Wareham managed to cling on to runners-up place in the league, which was very good, but Farnborough won it. Fair play to them. Overall, I think the team thought it was too much travelling. We were going up to 200-mile round trips, which meant early starts and getting home pretty late. And we were able to join the Hans Wilson Dorset League the following year. There we remained for about 5 years, I think. And stories about that league will have to wait for another day. I hope you've enjoyed this ramble about the Avon Valleys Winter League back in 1980. Until next time, it's goodbye for now.